Lycidas, a Monody by John Milton Part Second. All nature mourns the death of Lycidas. To the poet his death is as mortal as frost to flowers or canker to the rose. This is the most passionate outburst of personal grief in the poem. But oh, the heavy change now thou art gone. Heavy is sad. Now thou Now that you are dead, thee shepherd, thee the woods and desert caves, with wild thyme and the gadding vine overgrown. Gadding vines are wandering or straggling because they are growing in abundance. The vines are growing everywhere. Thymes are herbs with fragrant leaves, and all their echoes mourn. The echoes of caves, here it is personified. The willows and the hazel copses green. Willows is a kind of tree usually growing near water, symbolic of grief. Hazel copses green, groves of green hazel trees, shall now no more be seen, fanning their joyous leaves to thy soft lays. Lays are songs. As killing as the canker of the rose. Fanning is moving like fans, moving their leaves like fans in harmony with the music. Joyous leaves are leaves full of joy. Canker is a kind of insect that feeds on blossoms. It is the enemy of the roses, as killing as the canker to the rose, or taint worm to the weanling herds that graze. Taint worm is a worm harmful to cattle. Weanling herds, young cattle that have been just weaned from the mother's milk. Or frost to flowers and their gay wardrobe that their gay wardrobe wear. Or frost to flowers that their gay wardrobe wear. Grey wardrobe is the flowers are clothed in gay colors. This suggests that death is as mortal as frost to flowers. When first the white thorn blows, such Lycidas, thy loss to shepherd's ear. Such means equally fatal to shepherd's ear. Your loss, the loss of your song by your untimely death, is as terrible to the ear of the poet as the canker is to the rose. Both of us, Milton and King, spent a long time together. They were students of the same college and studied the same subjects. They were like shepherds brought up in the same natural surroundings. The flocks of sheep which we fed were also our common possession. While we were leading our sheep, we heard the grey fly playing the horn at noon. While we did so, from morning to evening, we heard the rural people singing their songs attuned to their oaten flutes. The satyrs would dance with the wood nymphs, the fauns would attend to the sweet sound of songs, and old devotees also liked to listen to our poems. But the loss of Edward King or Lycidas has brought about a tremendous change. Lycidas, you will no more be found in the company of wild plants and herbs and wines. All the objects of nature are mourning your death. The loss of your life is as painful and harmful to me as the canker is to the rose, or the taint worm is to the grazing cattle, or the frost to the flowers is. Milton asked the nymphs, the goddesses of rivers and mountains, why did they not save from drowning their beloved Lycidas? Why were they not present at the place where he was drowned? But the very next moment the poet checks himself, for he realizes the futility of his complaint. Even if the goddesses had been present there, they would have failed to save the life of Lycidas. Even gods are helpless before death. Where were ye nymphs when the remorseless deep closed over the head of your loved Lycidas? Where were ye? Why were they not present where Lycidas was drowned? Nymphs are goddesses of mountains, streams, etc. Remorseless deep, unpitying or cruel sea, closed over his head, drowned him. For neither were ye playing on the steep, it must be some mountain near the Irish Sea where Lycidas was drowned. Where your old bards, the famous Druids, lie. Druids are the spirits who were the priests of the ancient Britons. Nor on the shaggy top of Mona high. Shaggy top of Mona, the mount in the island full of trees. Mona, the old name of Isle of Anglesey, the haunt of the Druids. Nor yet where Deva spreads her wizard stream. Deva is the old name for River Dee. Wizard stream is magical river which forms the boundary of England and Wales, and it is said that it could foretell the future of Wales and England. I fondly dream. Alas, I foolishly dream. Had ye been there, the poet addressing the nymphs is about to say, had you been there, you might have saved Lycidas. Had ye been there, for what could that have done? But recalling that their presence could not have been of any help, he adds, for what could that have done? What could the muse herself that Orpheus bore? The muse herself, Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, in mythology she was the mother of Orpheus. Orpheus, the famous musician in Greek mythology, whose music could raise walls. His wife Eurydice died in her youth. He went to the underworld and pleased Pluto with his music. The result was that Pluto agreed to release Eurydice with the condition that Orpheus would not turn back and look at her till they reached the earth. But Orpheus could not keep up the promise, and consequently Eurydice vanished forever. In his grief, the musician raised the Thracian Mendas and looked at their women in contempt. They tore him into pieces. His head was thrown into the Hebrus river and was carried to the Isle of Lesbos, where finally it was buried. The muse herself for her enchanting son. Her enchanting son is Orpheus, whose music could charm the listeners, whom universal nature did lament. Universal nature, all nature, animate as well as inanimate, lament, mourn the death of. When by the rout that made the hideous roar, rout, a disorderly crowd, it refers to Thracian women who were engaged in wild revelry that made the hideous roar. Reference is to the death of Orpheus when he was torn into pieces by the Thracian woman. His gory visage down the stream was sent, gory visage, face covered with blood, down the swift Hebrus to the Lesbian shore. They tore him into pieces. His head was thrown into the Hebrus river and was carried to the Isle of Lesbos, where finally it was buried. The poet blames the nymphs, the goddesses of mountains and rivers, for not saving Edward's life. He says, nymphs, where were you all when the merciless ocean drowned Lycidas in its water? You were playing neither on the steep grounds where your poets' druids lie, nor were you on the mountains of Mona Island, nor were you living in the water of the magical river Deva. Even if you had tried, you would not have been able to help him. Even the powerful goddess Calliope, who was also the mother of Orpheus, the powerful musician, could not help her charming son when his head was thrown into the Hebrus and was carried to the Isle of Lesbos finally, where it was buried. When such a powerful goddess as Calliope could not save her own son, how could the nymphs, less powerful goddesses, have saved the life of Edward King, even if they had been present on the scene? Through the use of this epic simile, Milton has brought in the entire story of the death of Orpheus and thus imparted the charm of variety to his poem. The passage is one of the two long digressions in the poem. The poet comments on the decline of poetry in the age. It is useless now to devote oneself night and day to the writing of serious poetry, for people do not care for it. It is much better to write love lyrics and other poets as other poets of the age do. It is fame which makes a poet live laborious days in the service of poetry, but just when a poet is near fame and popularity, his life is cut short by cruel fate and he dies. But the very next moment, Apollo, the god of poetry, reminds the poet that true fame is not of this world and it does not depend upon the opinion of the people of this world. True fame True fame arises from the approval of God Himself. Such fame is immortal. It lives on even after the death of the poet. Therefore, he, that is, Milton, need not despair. He would certainly get the reward he deserves. Alas, what boots it with incessant care to tend the homely, slighted shepherd's trade? What boots it? Of what use is it? What is the good of it? Boots is profit, incessant, constant, unceasing. Tend, a short form of attend, homely, slighted. These adjectives qualify trade. Homely is used in the sense of simple, slighted means treated with indifference. Shepherd's trade, pastoral language for the profession of practice of poetry. And strictly meditate the thankless muse. Strictly is vigorously submitting oneself to rigorous discipline. Meditate, practice to apply with close attention. The thankless muse, because poetry yields nothing in return for labor which is done on it. Were it not better done as others use to sport with amaryllis in the shade, or with the tangles of Neira's hair? Were it not, if it were not, as others use, as others do, sport, play, tangles are locks, curls of hair. Amaryllis and Neera are two names of women found in pastoral poetry. Here the reference is made to the Cavalier poets who wrote love lyrics for beautiful ladies. Milton thinks that it is better to write light poetry because serious poetry is not respected and admired by the people of his day. Fame is the spur that the clear spirit doth raise, that last infirmity of noble mind. Spur is incentive, clear is noble, pure. Infirmity is weakness. That last infirmity of noble mind, the idea is taken from the Roman writer Tacitus. It means that even those people who are not tempted by other weaknesses, example money, feel the attraction of fame. To scorn delights and live laborious days. To scorn delights means to deny themselves the pleasures of life. Live laborious days, time spent in working hard over serious poetry. Milton was himself leading a life of labor at Horton when he wrote this poem. But the fair guerdon, when we hope to find, and think to burst out into sudden blaze. Guerdon is reward, to burst out, shine forth suddenly, become famous all of a sudden. Sudden blaze is sudden glory. But the fair guerdon when we hope to find, and think to burst out into sudden blaze, comes the blind fury with the abhorred shears, and slits the thin spun life. Blind fury with the abhorred shears means the reference is to Atropos, one of the fates who cuts about man's life. Abhorred shears, hateful scissors, slits his cuts, the thin spun Life means the weak thread of life, but not the praise. Phoebus replied. Phoebus is Apollo, god of music and poetry. Phoebus replied and touched my trembling ears, touched my ears trembling with excitement. Alas, what is the use of following the profession of a poet by Edward King and Milton too? The task of thinking seriously on poetry is of no use. It is not better to write light love verses like other poets. Is it not better? The poet thinks that it is better to write love verses like other poets. Fame is the incentive, that is the weakness of noble souls, but that helps them make progress in life. It enables them to lead laborious days in composing serious poetry. But as soon as we hope to get the reward of our labor, fate comes and cuts short our life. But Apollo, the god of music and poetry, tells me that true fame is immortal.